COVID-19 and what needs to change. We'll have a snappy title. We're going to be here for an hour and a half, and we are going to finish on time. So that might mean that if you have any questions, we don't perhaps get to your question, but don't worry, we're going to put my email address in the chat several times. So if you think of anything later you want to ask, you can come to gallery staff or one of our speakers via email. Just a bit of Zoom etiquette before we start. Please keep yourself on mute, especially during when our speakers are talking, unless you're asked to unmute to talk later.
I thought I'd have trouble.
See, like this. And if there's anything that you think of that you'd like to ask while we're going along, put your questions, your comments, your hellos in the chat, and we'll be monitoring them and selecting different great questions that haven't already been answered when we get to our discussion session towards the end. Don't forget, if you're a bit new to Zoom, you can go to the top right-hand corner and select speaker view so that the person who's talking is bigger to your view. And please note, we are going to start recording this session. So if you don't want your face to appear later on our YouTube channel, turn off your camera now. When we have a little breakout room session, we're going to record the audio only for that. So do feel free to talk, but we're not going to use that publicly. That's just for our own reference to get your good ideas feeding into the work of the gallery. I suppose now's the time that I should introduce us all. I should have started with that, shouldn't I? I'm Hannah Williamson. I'm one of the curators at the gallery, and I'm here with several colleagues and invited guests. We've got Ruth, who you might know, on the Zoom admin. We've got Janet monitoring the chat, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague Claire, who is going to do a thematic introduction to us, not just the Zoom admin. Here comes the nitty-gritty.
Thanks, Hannah. Can you hear me okay? Great. So hi everyone, yeah, I'm Claire, and I'm Curator of Contemporary Art at Manchester Art Gallery. I'm not going to talk for very long because there's lots and lots of exciting things to hear about from other people as well. Well, interesting things to hear about. And I just wanted to share a little bit of context and background to why we've organised this gathering this evening about work. So this event is part of a process that we're calling the Gallery Rethink. While many of us from the gallery have been working from home, we've been continuing a process of rethinking gallery displays that in parts haven't changed for around 20 years. And the rethink involves exploring how we work with the public collection that's owned by the people of Manchester to tell relevant stories about lived experience in the 21st century. And it's an acknowledgement that in cultural institutions like the gallery, certain people have got to tell these stories in the past and have got to decide what's seen and what's not seen. So as well as looking at changing and reinterpreting what's on display, it's also about exploring processes, ways of working and decision making, and how people use the gallery, aiming for a more democratic sense of who or what the gallery is for. This obviously takes time, and it's a process that probably has no end, but we do have a number of starting points for this rethink that are in progress at the moment. So as well as work, we're thinking about such areas as climate justice, migration, identities. Those are just some of the other areas that we're looking at, and they're obviously very interconnected. Some of the key aims of this process are about collectively learning from history and imagining new possible futures. And art gives us so much opportunity to do that together. In all of this work, we think there's a need to make it more obvious that decisions made in cultural institutions are not separate from the wider world. Art doesn't just reflect the world back at us, it's really powerful, and it actively shapes our understandings of the world and of ourselves. And this gathering this evening is what we hope will be the start of opening up more publicly some thinking about the history, present and future of work. The pandemic, as many have acknowledged in lots of different ways, has revealed so much about work, about values, about what might have been lost and gained, inequality and unfairness. It's revealed so much. And also how social factors like race, class, gender, disability and age all need to be part of any consideration of these questions. I just want to quickly mention what's changed recently in Gallery 7 and online, our dedicated workspaces. Last year we acquired Craig Oldham's poster, Key Workers, which Craig made as a direct response to Priti Patel's labelling of certain workers as low skilled or unskilled, the people that we now call key workers. I'm not going to say any more about the poster right now because it's going to be used in a minute for a warm-up exercise. So we've already made some partial changes to the gallery using the poster and other works from the collection that draw attention to questions that we've been thinking about around work. And in a parallel but very connected process, we're also working with the artist Suzanne Lacey on an artwork and process called Uncertain Futures. One of our guest speakers is going to say more about that later, so I won't say more about it now. Back to this evening, so we thought we'd start with a very general open question this evening. What have we learned about work during COVID-19 and what needs to change? We've got some really great speakers, all of whom are going to help us open up that conversation. And I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ruth, who's going to introduce the next part of the event.
Okay, we wanted to just bring everybody into this next section by just doing a quick warm-up exercise that gets us thinking about what we've learned about work during COVID-19 and what needs to change. And rather than having a discussion, I'm going to share Craig Oldham's Key Workers poster, and I'd like you to put in the chat 3 words that sorry, if somebody hasn't got their, if somebody's not muted, could you mute, because there's a little bit of background noise. So I'd like you to put in the chat kind of 3 words of a response to the posters, and I will share the posters now and just give us some time sort of in silence to think. And I'm just going to share it to a bigger screen if I can. Just try and do this. Sorry, there's lots of layering of people. We can see the poster here, and I'll make it so we can move forward in a moment. And yeah, so if you just want to type in the chat kind of 3 words that come to mind, or a sentence or a response. And I've got some closer detail of the poster here. Just going to read out a few things whilst people are still typing, and not everybody's, but just a few. So, how do we define work? Timely, a sea of people, misleading, passive, need to respect all, undervalued, value people, caring is erroneously seen as unskilled. Will those who thought these people were low skilled before the pandemic change their opinion? The too often forgotten. I'm sure they will be. How unfair it is. Essential, complex, political, caring, unhelpful, political, judgmental, insult, a fine hope, but how? Value everybody's contribution. Turns out Priti Patel deemed me low-skilled, insulted, demeaned, indignant. Each role makes me think of the phrase number. Is that right? Or hashtag. Insulting, patronizing. Is skill the most valuable asset of a worker? Inclusion. Each role makes me think of the phrase another brick in the wall. Taken for granted. Does value relate only to money? Agree. All jobs have skills. Inadequacy of language. Very appropriate. Silly. Respect and value. We're all involved. Misguided. Avoiding the issue of skills. Labeling, judgmental hierarchy of skills. Insulting, demeaning, unfair. Skill level is not the same as essential. From one perspective, is parent in there? That's really interesting end question. We'd have to read through them all and see. Thank you, everybody, for just starting us off in that and starting us thinking. And I hope that's just a little introduction to get our thoughts and brains working. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Janet.
Hi everyone. I'd like to introduce now the first of our 4 speakers this evening. So first up is Elayne Redford, our work and skills specialist from Manchester City Council. Over to you, Elayne.
Hi everyone. I can't see everyone because there's so many of us, but I can see quite a number of you, so it's nice to see all those faces. So yeah, as Janet said, I'm a work and skills specialist from the City Council, and I was going to start off to talk about the artwork that I had chosen for this evening, and it's I think we're just going to just pop it up on the screen now. So I'll just give it a second. There we go. So this is a painting, an oil on canvas painting, and it's called Basket Makers in Naples, and it was painted in 1878 by the artist Ruben Santoro. And you can see in the painting that it depicts 2 women and 3 girls sitting in the sun weaving baskets in Naples in Italy, and it looks like the sun is absolutely beating down on them, which is lovely because we don't see too much of that at the moment, but it really reminded me of the importance of sharing skills, experience and knowledge, which I imagine is going on here in this setting, with the older women sharing all they know with younger women, and the conversation that's probably happening while they're undertaking this activity, which you can imagine has been passed down from generation to generation. And it made me think of the intergenerational aspect as well, and how important it is. And it's showing how women come together to engage in something really creative, but also something really purposeful. And although basket weaving is perhaps a dying art nowadays, it is still a skill, and it's developed by experts today and passed down through generations. So the painting really made me think of the role that women play in supporting the economy, and how during the pandemic, as a group, women have really been quite adversely impacted. And even though that has been the case, they'd still always find a way to support and lead within their communities. So the question that we're looking at this evening is, what have we learned about work during COVID and what needs to change? So what we've learned is that for women, and particularly older women, the impact has been huge and often quite unfair. prior to COVID, people around the ages of 50 to 64 already had the lowest re-employment rate if they fell out of work. And then there was an increased risk of falling into long-term unemployment and poor health. And we know that this is exacerbated for women where they're traditionally working in precarious roles. A high percentage of women sometimes work in part-time roles. So these kind of disadvantages can push them further back in the labour market. So the effects of COVID has been massive, as we said. It's impacted greatly on discrimination and inequality, as Claire mentioned earlier, and it has really affected the women that are working in those sectors that have been most affected by lockdown restrictions, people working in retail, in hospitality, and of course in frontline roles, many carers, a lot of whom are women. So you can see my focus today is about women and employment, and particularly women over the age of 50, and for those that are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. So there's a real issue around all those inequalities and how more than ever so before women are facing it on a day-to-day basis. But despite this kind of negative story, we have learned that there is a real willingness to help, and there's great community spirit which we've seen activated in many people, and it's actually given them the confidence to consider work if they perhaps not considered it before. They've found that they do have lots of skills that they want to share with other people, and that's been a really positive effect if you can look at it in a positive light. We've also learned really that people in those frontline roles, so as we've just been looking at that piece of artwork at the beginning there and our views on that, we've learned how important those key workers are, and the foundation economy, as we call it, that provides the goods and services, really important to us all, but often not very well supported by decent wages and stable working hours. And of course, we're all working quite differently as well now. So the pandemic's brought a new focus on flexible and remote working, but that means that we need to be aware of our health and well-being when we're working away from each other. And of course, it flags up as well the issues of age bias in the workplace and when people are trying to return to work. So that's just some of the learnings that we've gathered over the last 12 months or so. But what needs to change? Well, really, we need to look at policy and employment providers, support services, employers themselves need to really make sure that age isn't a barrier to the economic recovery. What we really need is a system that doesn't overlook people that are older and women in particular. And we need to just value all the assets that women bring to the economy, those that are in paid work or those that are in unpaid work. And that really leads me to talk about a project that I'm involved in along with the gallery and the artist Suzanne Lacey, and Claire alluded to it a little bit earlier. And it's called Uncertain Futures. And this is the project is a collaborative artwork with the artists and a co-researching group of women all over 50 who, some are activists, some are service providers from wide backgrounds. We're all coming together to look at the intersectional issues of work, gender, age, and race. And we're having a series of conversations, 15 of us in this advisory group, having a series of conversations to understand more how women have been affected, women and the issues all around employment. So the common issues that we've been talking about are increasing pension age, finances, health, skills deficits. And all these conversations, we will reach out to a wider group of women, 100, if not more, probably, and bring this all together in an art piece that will be activated in the gallery in June or July, perhaps, depending on whether we can open up again. And the objective of this particular project is about bringing social change, showing that every woman matters, sharing experiences of our skills, and providing an opportunity to share the ageing experience related to employment. So for changes to happen, I think we all need to feel that we can talk about our work experiences, whether we're in work, whether we're looking for work, whether it's work that we do with our families at home, whether it's negative or positive, but we need employers and policy makers to kind of listen to what we're saying. So the Uncertain Futures project is really keen to show that women have a lot to offer, that they are better represented when the economy reopens, and it will seek to kind of make more visible some of those issues that we're perhaps not thinking about enough. So if I go back to the painting, the basket weavers, this was in 1878, but that whole skill sharing and experience that those women are sharing with each other is just as relevant now in 2021 as it was in 1878. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elayne. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And I'd now like to introduce our second speaker, John Hacking, who is Living Wage Campaign Coordinator for Greater Manchester Poverty Action Group and also a Manchester City Council councillor. Over to you, John.
Hi there. Good to see everybody. I'm here solely as the Living Wage Campaign Coordinator. I'm very proud to be a councillor for Manchester, but I'm not representing the council tonight. Thankfully. I just want to start off with the image, I think. I'm going to talk particularly quite narrowly about low pay in Greater Manchester and about the impact that has and what we've kind of learned during the pandemic about that and what we can do about redressing that issue. I mean, we were asked to pick a painting. There are obviously tens of thousands to choose from, and I kind of alighted on this one because I thought to myself, I will almost certainly pick something that shows grimy smokestacks and streets of Manchester with barefoot urchins and all of the rest of the sort of true but cliched vision of urban poverty. Anyway, I decided to come on to this one, partly because for those of you who are far more knowledgeable about art, which is probably just about everybody on this call than me, it's called Hard Times, and it's by Hubert von Herkomer, who I googled, and I would advise you to do the same. He's a bit of a character. He was an economic migrant to this country, and then an economic migrant to, I think, Canada, and then came back to, he was Austrian by birth, I think, and then came back to this country. So in himself, he had a colourful sort of experience. And he says actually that he painted this as partly as a reference to his early childhood, which was not abject poverty, but was certainly straitened conditions for a man who later became quite wealthy. I also chose it because it's got the same title as a Charles Dickens novel, which contains a fictional town called Coketown, which of course is thinly disguised Manchester. And it's also the title of a song by the effortlessly unfashionable Steel Ice Band called Hard Times of Old England, which if you've not heard it and you quite like folk music, then I should give it a go. Anyway, apparently it's Victorian social realism. but I'll leave that to others to confirm or deny. The image itself is of some itinerant rural workers in the south of England, I think, probably. And the sort of gig economy is our sort of definition of the kind of employment conditions that these workers will have experienced. Zero contract hours, low pay, insecure employment terms, precarious housing conditions are still very much as prevalent, not as prevalent, but certainly prevalent today as they were for the family in this picture. I like the picture because, I won't dwell on it, but I like the picture because there's a kind of hope and desperation captured in the painting. The man looks hopefully in the distance down the lane, and the woman just looks overburdened and exhausted. So I think that in essence, the picture is of people wearied by their situation, but not defeated by it. And you feel that with a bit of help and a fairer deal, they might thrive and flourish. And that's what I believe the campaign to tackle low pay sets to achieve, in essence. That's what we're about in tackling poverty, is to enable people to thrive and flourish, and to have the sort of lives that they would want for their families and children. So just a little bit of background. Greater Manchester Living Wage campaign is part of the Greater Manchester Poverty Action, a not-for-profit organisation. We work with all sectors across Greater Manchester, and the objective is to increase the number of employers in the city region who pay the living wage, which, for those of you who are curious, is currently £9.50 per hour outside London. It's set by the Living Wage Foundation. It's the voluntary living wage. It's not the minimum wage or the national living wage, which the government set. And it's determined as a figure that should allow people to live a very basic, but at least a decent life. So it's calculated by an organisation called the Resolution Foundation, and it takes into account all sorts of factors like, you know, presents for your kids at Christmas and stuff like that. It's not the kind of harsh statistical analysis that they use to set the minimum wage and the national wage. It's got a bit more humanity involved in it, I think. There is a problem of low pay in Greater Manchester. The figures we've got are mostly pre-pandemic, but about 24% of all the workers in Greater Manchester earn less than the living wage, the real living wage. And that's about just over 250,000 workers. So it's not an insubstantial problem. It impacts on definitely. It impacts on different sectors. The sectors that are worst affected, not a surprise, retail and wholesale, hospitality, tourism, and health and social care. Women are disproportionately affected by low pay, and form actually a significant proportion of that workforce that are on low pay. So we were asked, what have we learned? Well, we know that we came into this pandemic one of the fastest growing economies in the UK. Irrespective of your view of growth, we were an economy with a large number of jobs, significant proportion of them low paid, but we are likely to come out of this recession, out of this pandemic in a recession. So it's been a real change. We all know it's been a very a key moment, really. I suppose what we've learned, I don't want to be facetious, but I think we've learned that what we already knew was true. Those on low pay, marginalised communities, vulnerable sectors of society were most afflicted by low pay. That's where low pay was found. What we also found, I think, what we learned is actually it's worse than that. It's worse than we thought. The pandemic also exposed to a wide that were and pay were actually shadowed by equally grotesque inequalities in health, alongside other areas such as education, opportunity, some of which Elayne talked about earlier. It didn't come as a surprise to many, because when I looked at the question about what have we learned, I think actually amongst sort of politicians, policymakers, activists, campaigners, we knew about the inequalities between different parts of society. We knew that pay was a major contributor to that, amongst other things. but we also, I think what happened was that the wider public became aware of that as well, and the wider public became aware of the importance of frontline and key workers in a way that I think they probably hadn't done before, because they were suddenly hearing about them every day, and in a lot of cases were relying on them every day in a way that they hadn't done before. We also learned, not least through the Thursday night clap, that the general public cared about these issues in a manner that we probably didn't think they did prior to the pandemic. And I think almost certainly what we've learned is that we reward those least who we need most. I think that if there's any single message come out of this pandemic in terms of employment, it's that the people who are on the front line, key workers, are paid the least. And it's turned out that actually we could live without hedge fund managers, but we found it quite difficult to live without care workers and bus drivers. So what do we what needs to change, or what do we do next? I genuinely believe there's an opportunity has emerged to build back better, and I just want to say a few thoughts on that, and then I'll wrap up from me. We're currently working with the Mayor, Andy Burnham, and other partners across the region to achieve the goal of making Greater Manchester a living wage city region within 3 years. There's all sorts of reasons for that. There's all sorts of outcomes to that, but it will basically mean that tens of thousands of workers will see an uplift in their salary if we can achieve encouraging living wage employers to pay the living wage. So what needs to change, really? I think we need to support key workers who've supported us through this crisis, and to make sure at the very least they are paid the real living wage. There are issues around that, because lots of those workers are in health and social care. Lots of that health and social care is funded through local authorities. Lots of local authorities are seeing budget cuts and still the effects of austerity. So there are, you know, I appreciate there are challenges, but nonetheless, that's something that needs to change. We need to continue to make the case to businesses, actually, and to employers, that paying people a decent wage isn't just a matter of economics, it's a matter of social justice. It is basically wrong to pay people poverty wages and to run businesses on that basis. It is not a matter of whether we think it's an economic necessity, it's whether we turn that round and think whether it has any social justice attached to it at all. We need to continue to make case to the business for the real living wage. COVID has changed the environment. We know that, we're in a recession. But the basic reasons and the basic benefits of paying the living wage haven't changed. And that's a key message for us. So I think we need to rethink the way we treat all our workers. We need a system that provides security, certainty, and safety for all workers. So it's not just about pay, it's about 0 hours contracts, it's about temporary contracts and all of that. I think otherwise, you know, in a sense, so what if we don't build back better? I think otherwise we'll continue to have to live with, metaphorically at least, thousands of our fellow citizens left at the side of the road, looking weary and dejected, and looking hopefully to the future for something better to come along. So I think the time now, it is a kind of iconoclastic moment, I think. And I think that picture, they are staring down the road looking hopefully at the future. And I think the best thing that we can do is to help those workers who are on low pay to look to the future with a little bit more hope than they have done in the past. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Powerful stuff there, John. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Fauziya Johnson, artist, curator, producer, co-founder and editor of Rooted Zine, representing, inspiring people of colour in the Northwest. Over to you, Fauziya.
Hi, thanks for that. I hope everyone's having a good evening so far. Just going to share my screen. Oops. Actually, I'm just going to take my video off because my internet's quite bad. Hope that you don't mind, but you'll be seeing the screen anyway. That's more important than my face. Right, okay. So I hope everyone can see my screen. Let me know if you can't. My name's Fauziya, and thanks for coming along to, talk part of this discussion. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and work, and also about mental health. So just a quick overview of me. I've already been introduced, but yeah, a curator, artist and producer, and I'm based in Liverpool. And I did a magazine called Rooted Zine, which is a magazine for people of colour within the northwest of England. And our aim is to represent the underrepresented. And these are just a few of my digital drawings. So I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a rundown about my work at the moment, just for a little bit of context. So about 40% of my work is freelance, which includes like presentations, art workshops, editing, the marketing and administration of Rooted Zine. And then about 60% of my work is actually, I work for the 119 service for NHS vaccine, as an NHS vaccine booking operator. And what I've noticed through the queries and the worries that people have come through, the main emotion that people are feeling right now in regards to the pandemic is definitely just anxiety and nervousness. So that's just part of it, and that's what we see. So if you ring at 119, you might talk to me or maybe 4,000 other agents. So what have we learnt about work in COVID-19? So work really is all about the support network that you do or you don't have. And without the correct support at home and in work, it can be quite difficult to do the job that, you're being paid to do, and also to feel fulfilled and satisfied within that job as well. How before the pandemic and especially during, there isn't very much like job security or protection in terms of the contracts that you're entering into. For example, I was in a 0 hours contract, and then when the furlough scheme came along, I was put into furlough. And basically, it was kind of like an ultimatum that if I don't work through furlough, I would have been let go. So after about 4 months of working whilst on furlough, which is completely wrong, but I was kind of forced into that, I stood up for myself and I said, no, I don't want to work anymore. And then basically I was let go, and it was because of the clause of the 1 week, what's called like the 1 week notice that the employer can give to an employee. So there needs to be more job security and protection, especially in contracts. And that people within hospitality, beauty, and the sex work industry amongst some of that have been affected, but is not being talked about within the media. So I thought I'd bring it up here. And also people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, who've been shielding or have literally not left their household in the past year. I think they need to be celebrated and looked after a lot more than they are currently. For example, more housebound visits of vaccinations would be amazing. And of course, if they were doing volunteering opportunities and work opportunities, they could continue with that. So companies need to invest more into remote working. I don't know if you remember at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of insecurity that employers had towards their employees about if, they're going to get the job done correctly and if it's going to be up to a satisfactory level. And then we realize now that people can work from home, and more mutual trust and responsibility needs to be given to employees. Especially, you're saving on transportation costs, but if you have a particular disability that makes it hard for you to travel to get to certain places, especially with public transport not being the most accessible, then, not traveling to work can be a really, really big benefit, which I hope continues to stay the same, or at least in most cases. And more awareness on health and disability does need to be implemented into managerial staff training. So if I, present to my employer, I have this condition, and I need you to help me, navigate the workspace with this condition, I should expect that employer gets trained on how to deal with like certain things that may happen as a result of my needs. And also that managers need to be supported in some way, because if the managers aren't supported and they're not looked after, the employees are not looked after as much either. So how has work and COVID-19 affected my mental health in particular? So I've got BPD, which is borderline personality disorder, but it's also called emotionally unstable personality disorder. And the main symptoms are generally like a high suicide rate, emotional instability, and unstable sense of self, chronic emptiness, lots of different things like a fear of abandonment. But there's actually been a few things on a more optimistic side that COVID has helped me with. So of not doing things face to face, for example, facial expressions is something that I just do subconsciously and consciously. That when I'm talking to someone and I'm looking at their facial expressions, even their micro expressions can really set the mood and make me be a bit fearful and pessimistic about how they're feeling towards me as we're having a conversation. So then having this through Zoom and not, I don't have to look at people's faces, or it might be just a pixelated face, actually helps relieve some of that anxiety. And then with medication, so I'm on 2 to 3 medications a day, depending on my needs. And a lot of it, I get like a lot of sleep disturbances, a lot of fatigue, and my diet changes on a regular basis. So it's difficult to deal with those side effects of the medication. Like, I'm sure if you've ever taken any medication, the side effects that come with it, dealing with that at home is much less stressful than it is dealing with it within a workplace, if that makes sense. And then, yeah, I don't know if you just, if I'll stop sharing and then you could share it as well. Hopefully some of that
I
resonated.
think just carry on sharing because you've got the image there. I don't need to share it. So
Yeah,
yeah, you carry on sharing. That's better.
okie dokie. So generally, I graduated from uni 3 years ago, and we didn't really do much major in art history. So I felt a bit intimidated when looking at all of the paintings and, wondering how to interpret them. But I do like to think about how the artist thinks and what they genuinely like to spend time on when within an artwork. So the amount of time that they spend on particular aspects or parts of the artwork as well. So logistically, people will be smaller than the ship canal. That goes without saying. But in terms of how people are represented within this image, such as dashes of paint, and I assume these are people, this is just my interpretation. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but like they're just dashes of paint in comparison to the amount of time that's taken to paint the canal. And looking at it in a more like symbolic and kind of like semantic way as well, is how the people aren't really thought about and not much effort is being put into the people within this painting. Whereas the lifeless kind of like infrastructures and contracts, and I'll get a little bit political now, economic initiatives to appease the rich are being effort has been put into in regards to that. So I'm feeling like Benjamin is kind of like the view, like he is the government, and kind of like the canal and the building and the infrastructures there, they are basically the contracts that have been put into to appease the rich. And then we're kind of at the bottom, just a bunch of kind of like statistics. So kind of like a juxtaposition between humans and buildings, and then that parallels with statistics and qualitative data. Yeah, that's kind of my take on it, but I'm interested to see if anyone agrees or disagrees. That's all. And I'm back.
Thank you, Fauziya. Now I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Mark Burton, a collective member of Steady State, a campaigning organisation concerned with climate change, inequality and economic vulnerabilities. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Janet, and thanks to the 3 speakers so far. I kind of rather thought this might happen, that we get to this point and what more is there to be said? But I think I've got a few things. But I won't try and repeat kind of what's been covered, because those points that all the speakers have made have been absolutely fantastic. we've seen already how the pandemic, several people have mentioned, has made things more visible. But I also want to focus on both how it's made some things visible, but how also some things remain invisible. So maybe we could look at the first picture. Okay, so this is, as you can see, sprout picking in Monmouthshire by Elayne Mary Dunbar. And it's actually the Women's Land Army during the Great War Against Fascism, 1939 to 45. And for me, it was interesting on a number of different levels. One of the things I've done in the pandemic is I've picked up my paintbrush and paints again. I'm very much an amateur, pretty incompetent, and I used to paint, and I hadn't for nearly 20 years. And that's been great, and struggling with the media and so on, and looking at this picture and thinking, oh wow, I love the light in it, which doesn't come quite so well on my screen, but I hope you can sort of see it. And I'm kind of wondering if it's the morning or the evening, you know, these workers are out there already and the sun's just coming up, or is this the end of the day? But also it's called sprout picking, but for me it looks like the lettuce fields that I used to work on in my summers as a young man. And it also reminds me of potato picking in Northern Ireland when I was still at school. And a few things kind of occur to me. I mean, actually the lettuce field, those sheds in the background could equally be the greenhouses where we slaved away in the heat in the summer growing tomatoes. And for me, there's a number of things kind of here. There's the kind of the threat of the weather changing and it becoming very inclement. Probably in this picture, probably quite cold, you know, fingers cold and so on. Bending, that back-breaking nature of that job of kind of picking stuff up from the ground for hours and hours and hours, the monotony of it, but also the companionship, being there in the field with a number of other people, you know, the conversations, the banter and so on. But it says a number of other things to me. And in relation to the pandemic and the lockdown, it just recalls really the importance of food and of basic provisioning, which I think we've kind of seen much more. And in a way, the pandemic has kind of revealed the kind of the fragility of that. You know, when the lockdown started, there were shortages. You weren't quite sure whether you could get deliveries and so on. We had to stay at home. But at the same time, there's that invisibility, because that message, stay at home, we could only stay at home because some people didn't. We could only stay in individual isolation, as it were, because other people were working collectively. And in a way, that's been the hidden dimension of the isolation of lockdown. It's been that other collective activity. And I won't, go on much more about sort of key workers and low-paid workers and so on, because those points have been made. So that's the curious paradox of our isolation, that it's made possible by collective and often invisible labour that's poorly remunerated. But there's a difference. In the picture, this is the wartime, and there the country focused on producing its own food, whereas we still, import a tremendous amount. But the pandemic and Brexit too have given us a hint about the vulnerability of our supply chains and our national dependency on imports. Do you remember the lorry drivers' strike back in 2000, when the government were putting up fuel duty every year, and the lorry drivers basically said no more, and immediately almost there were food shortages. And one of the kind of pieces of work reflecting on that was called 9 Meals from Anarchy, and it talked about the vulnerability of our supply chains, because actually we're probably only 9 meals away from kind of social breakdown and disorder. So in a way, these kind of crises reveal that kind of fragility of the very complex and interlinked supply chains that we depend upon. And that's, I suppose, the other thing, this kind of return to the land of people from the towns going to work on the land, which is what happened in the war. Could we have envisaged a return of that as those linked crises intensify and system collapse possibly looms? So we've got what I've called a pan crisis, a set of interlinked crises. So we've got carbon pollution, the crisis of global warming, of ecosystem encroachment and biodiversity reduction. We've got resource exhaustion and peak extraction, leading to problems of profitability and financial instability. We've got the expansion of the extractive frontiers. And we've got those internal contradictions of capitalism. It's repeated sort of cycles and this problem of what's known as secular stagnation, where the thing is kind of gradually almost sort of grinding to a halt anyway, despite the irrespective of the crises. So these wider crises have no satisfactory exit within the terms of reference of the current capitalist world system. They're all together. But it isn't just food production that makes isolation possible. In all the areas where key workers work, if you think of care, of transport, of distribution, we've got that collective working, and in those sectors, the workers have been the most vulnerable to infection. And what we've learned in a way is that production for need, production for producing the things that we actually need and rely on, the things that we should be valuing, is more important than production for profit. Use values more important than exchange values. But the system that we live in doesn't allow that. It prioritizes exchange value, it prioritizes profit over human need. So it's as if we can't do what's right because the system that we're in won't allow it. And that's true for health, it's true for fairness, and it's true for the environment. Could we now move on to the second picture, please, Ruth? Thank you. Now this, not a painting, it's a photo, the Hell of Copper series by Nayaba Leon Udrauga, I guess you pronounce it. And I'll read, well, in this picture, we see, well, the first observation is that the isolation that we've had, what we're doing now, is made possible by information and communications technology. And this picture shows you something of the invisible dimension of that system, of that whole kind of infrastructure and products. In the so I'm going to read from the I guess it's the capture, the display label. From dawn to dusk, dozens of young Ghanaians from 10 to 25 years of age exhaust themselves 7 days a week. Their mission is to disassemble the old computers and burn certain plastic or rubber components to cull the precious copper, which will then be resold. Everything is done by hand or with iron bars, makeshift tools found among the refuse. They have neither masks nor gloves. There are not even any functioning toilets. The photographic series, The Hell of Copper, documents the 10 square kilometre electronic graveyard of the Agloboshi market in Accra, Ghana, where thousands of computers and electronic goods are shipped from Europe and North America. Children and young people dismantle old computers, burn the plastic or rubber components to reveal the valuable metal, which is then resold to Nigerians or Indians who rework it to make costly jewellery, mostly sold cheaply. Sorry, to make mostly jewellery that's then sold cheaply in Europe. The economy of waste has dramatic consequences for the environment and the health of the workers who handle them. Using their bare hands, the young workers are exposed to lead, mercury, cadmium, and PVC plastic, all of which are incredibly toxic to the human body. The chemicals have seeped into the nearby canal, contaminate the grazing land for cows and sheep. So the photographer's imagery of the sprawling landscape filled with computer carcasses and the individuals engaged in this dangerous work demonstrate the profoundly troubling consequence of the constant search for the latest phone, the fastest computer, or the new electronic gadget. But it's not just information and communication technology. It's everything else that we use pretty much. When it's thrown away, that away is kind of invisible. Think of the ships that bring all those products to our shores. When they're at the end of their life, they're broken up on beaches in Bangladesh in conditions similar from this, highly hazardous conditions. But it's not just in the exit of such products as waste for possible recycling where such devastation and super exploitation happens. It happens in production as well. It happens in the mining of rare materials. We know about conflict materials, but there's also what sounds rather nice, artisanal mining done by artisans. But what does that mean? It means mining done by private individuals in horrendous conditions, again with no safety equipment, exposed to poisons, extracting highly toxic substances like cobalt. And then there's the extraction of gold, which are used in the contacts in all this equipment for using mercury, which then poisons the environment and people's foodstuffs and so on. So we have ecosystem devastation, we have the destruction of livelihoods and communities, and especially indigenous communities in the global south. And then the manufacture and assembly, Foxconn in China, where iPads and iPhones are made, 12-hour shifts, six-day weeks, a high rate of suicides, for example, among the workers who've come in from the countryside. A lot of this recapitulating what we've had in Manchester in the Victorian era, those kind of Victorian conditions of super exploitation and horrendous working conditions. So the nexus of profit, hyper-exploitation of workers, community and ecosystem devastation, they are the consequences of our mode of living. And we're all implicated. So the pandemic has cast a light on inequality, exclusion and exploitation at home, but the wider dimensions of the world of work and the capitalist economy do remain largely invisible. So the pandemic is the writing on the wall. We have to make profound changes in the way we live, and that includes work. The problem is getting a toehold in the system whose parts are mutually reinforcing and that kind of locks in destruction with its incessant expansion. Now, I don't have time to spell out what's the way forward. You can look at our website, steadystatemanchester.net, where we've got a lot of kind of policy ideas and a whole lot of material there. But I'll give you a clue. The clue is thinking locally. It's about doing more for ourselves. It's about producing more of our food. It's about reshoring some of the manufacture of things that are needed. That's one of the key dimensions. And in doing that, we can connect with some of the good things that are happening around here. The city of Manchester's increased procurement from local businesses, for example. But let's kind of think of that kind of model and extend it to doing more locally, and in effect, consuming more of our smoke. So, you know, if you use something, if we produce it, then we should be dealing with the consequences of that and not exporting that to poison the livelihoods and the environments of people in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you to all of the speakers. We are now going to go into a short breakout room session is going to be quite short, just 10 minutes, bit of an experiment. We'll see how it goes. We will have probably around 10 people in each room. And can I just remind people who are helping facilitate, so our guest speakers, who we've had to ask for help because we've got so many people at the event, and gallery colleagues, if you could just remember to click on record if possible in each room. Thank you very much. So we're going to have a little bit of discussion in smaller groups, and just a reminder of the big question that we're looking at this evening: what have we learned about work during COVID-19 and what needs to change? But of course, you know, you've heard lots of different perspectives from 4 different speakers, and there's so much to think about, and I appreciate that you'll want to be reflecting on those themes and ideas as well. So after the breakout rooms, we are going to get back together as a bigger group, and there's been lots of questions and thoughts and ideas in the chat as well, so we will come back together and have some reflection on that as well. So a bit of a combination, small groups, big group. So Ruth is going to now facilitate seamlessly getting everyone into a breakout room. So thanks, Ruth.
So you should see something that comes up on your screen that just says join breakout room. So just click on that and enjoy the 10 minutes. Okay. Joe, and I noticed that John was supposed to be leading your group and then he disappeared. So I hope you were okay.
I'm just back.
John's back.
I don't know what happened, but I tried to record. It was already this is very boring, but it was already recording, so I was fiddling around trying to make it record just the breakout session, and then it decided to dump me out altogether. So sorry about that.
We didn't manage to record, I'm afraid. We can share what we talked about.
Don't worry, I was kind of keeping an eye on all the groups, and then I noticed John was missing, and then I didn't quite know how to bring you back, John, so I'm glad you're back now. And
yeah, me too.
Breakout groups, eh? So we've got about 15 minutes now where we're just going to have a chance for anybody to ask any questions to the 4 speakers or make any points. I probably, because there's quite a lot of us, the easiest way to do it is to type your question in the chat, and then I will come to you. And so we won't be able to go for everybody, but has anybody got a particular question that they'd like to ask one of the 4 speakers, or a point or a comment? And to write it in the chat. And then I'll come to you to actually say it out loud. Does anybody want to start us off? I can hear somebody typing.
It's me. Shall I just say it?
Just say it, Joe. Just if we got bombarded, I was going to. So, Joe, you start us off.
So in our group, I suppose the thing that we spoke about a few things, but one of the things that we kind of came to the conclusion about was, how do we break out of the echo chamber and make sure that the people who need to hear a lot of this are hearing it? And we felt that, you know, there was a lot of things that we're hearing today which are brilliant, and it reminds you of the situation that we're in, but that people on this call are probably pretty open to those ideas and believe them, whereas there are a lot of people out there who don't, and or don't care. So how do we reach those people, and who are they, and how do we reach them?
Thank you. Does John or Elayne or any of Fauziya and Mark, would any of you like to answer that? John, are you? Yeah,
I don't mind. I mean, I think the question there, Joe, is who are the target for our messages? I mean, I think you're right. I think most of us on this call, I hope, would support you know, things being different, particularly for those workers who prior to the pandemic were having a rough enough time as it was. I suppose from my point of view, I mean, we at the Living Wage Campaign do what we can to communicate as widely as possible with as many people and many groups as possible. But as you say, you know, resources are often limited. I mean, the Greater Manchester Living Wage Campaign has about 200 supporters and sort of volunteers across the GM. But in terms of resources, it's me a couple of days a week. So you're right. But I think the message on low pay is being heard. I mean, you know, love him or love it. The mayor has taken the pledge of, you know, we will be the first city region to be a living wage city region in the UK, and that within 3 years. And that's you know, it's a pledge, and we're all trying to work together to live up to that. So I think the message on certain things is getting across. I'm not sure that the message on restructuring the economy really and re-engineering it really to make it more equitable. I mean, a lot of the stuff that Mark said, you know, I don't know how much of that is reaching the ears of policymakers, because it's so radical and it's But my view of all this is, you know, and I'm 60. I'm not a you know, a teenager with dreams. You know, I've been around the block, but it does seem to me that if we don't seize an opportunity to change things after such a, you know, a cataclysmic and iconoclastic moment, then I don't know, you know, if not now, then when is my message to policymakers. So when I talk to politicians or employers or whatever, and they say, yeah, I've got other stuff to worry about, you know, got all the fallout from the pandemic. I say, but just putting it all back together the same isn't really good enough. You know, we need to change the picture on the box. You know, the jigsaw pieces might look the same, but we need to make a different picture because, you know, it wasn't working for a lot of people. And what the pandemic has exposed, particularly in the area that I work in, is that it's going to get worse. You know, it's not going to get better unless we do something about focusing on, you know, terms and conditions, decent work, proper training, proper career paths, proper structured employment, much more affordable housing. We need to make people more secure. You know, people shouldn't be afraid to go to work. And that's what's happening. You know, people have been, we know that low paid workers have been forced to go to work because they couldn't afford to self-isolate. And they put themselves and their families and the rest of us at risk through no fault of their own. And that can't carry on. We can't, you know, we're the 6th richest nation on earth. You know, we really shouldn't be tolerating this.
Thank you, John. We've got a question from Adam. If you have got a question, put it in the chat rather than put your hand up. So just put your question in the chat and then I'll ask you to read it out. So Adam, would you like to just read out your question?
Yeah, so my question is about well, education, I guess. I've put in the chat of the research done on sort of low earnings, living below minimum wage. I think 24% is what John said. How does that correlate with the levels of education specifically in Manchester? And I guess to widen the question to say Elayne, how easy are the women that you're speaking to? How easy is it? What sort of access do they have to retraining and education for that group?
Thank you. So there's sort of 2 questions within there. Who would like to answer the first part?
Well, I don't want to hog it, but I'll just say very quickly to Adam.
Yeah.
I could say very quickly to Adam that there is a correlation between, you know, levels of qualification and low pay. It does vary across Greater Manchester depending on where, you know, your age and where you live and all the rest of it. I've got more stats than you can shake a stick at, Adam. If you want to get my email after, I'll put it in the chat now, and email me. I'll happily send you. I've got a whole presentation on the sort of education impacts and the qualification levels. It's really, really interesting, but I'll send it to you.
Thank you. And the second part of the question was to Elayne about retraining opportunities, particularly for that period between 50 and 66. Elayne.
Yeah, it's a good question actually, because I think accessing training after a certain age becomes quite difficult and at a cost as well. So I know there's been a review of further education and a white paper produced not so long ago that does have some recommendations in there to fund up to level 3 for older people. So it's a kind of a small step in that direction, but yeah, it really is an issue for people that might need to change a sector and work in a different industry than they have done for many years because of the way that the world is now. But yeah, I think it's something that further education institutions are looking at, how they can make it more accessible. And obviously the conversation needs to happen with employers as well. So if you are in a role and you're wanting to access training and development, that is provided as well. So we do really need to have employers get on board with this whole agenda of supporting people that are in work that may need to move in a different direction.
Thank you, Elayne. There's a comment by Sally. If you'd like to, perhaps you could even turn it into a question. Actually, what does a well-expressed letter to your MP or national newspaper do? Sally,
you have to ask a question that can be answered.
No, you can make a comment.
But if you can, no.
Oh, sorry.
If you write a specific question politely that needs an answer, your MP will respond, and it sets them thinking along a different line. And if you express many of the questions that we've asked this afternoon through a letter to a national newspaper, other people who read that will reply to it, and it starts a discussion out in the world where more people than have joined this afternoon can be aware of the sort of things that we've now learned about and started to think about.
Thank you. That's a really good response to Joe's question, actually, about reaching out of the echo chamber. So thank you. And that follows on to Meg's question. Meg, would you like to ask, or I can read it out, but Meg.
Yeah, it was just really, are there sort of small acts that the panelists can recommend that one could do as an individual or within a workplace, or if you're retired, what small acts? I guess writing a letter to an MP is one of them, but just wondered if there were any thoughts.
Either from anybody in the panel or anybody else actually got any sort of thoughts around small acts? Mark, do you want to unmute?
Yeah. Yeah, just a couple of reflections really, rather than a direct answer. I think the one is that it was once said by someone who was an expert on the transition from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy: if we all do a little, we'll achieve a little. In other words, don't be, I suppose, too under the illusion that small acts will necessarily make a change. But what we can do is think about the concept of leverage. So which of those acts will actually have a knock-on effect, will have ripple effects, will influence other people? And you know, some things I think is just having these conversations. So at every opportunity, become a real bore, become a living wage bore, become a climate change bore, become a supply chain bore, so that more people are challenged and actually begin to think that and think about how you can do that. The other kind of way that's been expressed is increasing your political footprint, so that you're not just doing that with your immediate circle, but I think as was just said, writing engaging with your elected representatives, engaging with the media, even though all those things are pretty imperfect, they enlarge your political and influence footprint.
Thank you, Mark. That leads us to the end of this time for questions. And I know there were a few other comments in the chat, so please do feel to just comment amongst yourselves in the chat. I knew this was going to be a short time. I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who started us off, and she's going to wrap up for the last few minutes. Hannah.
Well, it's a hard thing to have the last word on, but fortunately, this isn't the last word on this subject, not for anyone, but definitely not for us at the gallery. This is just part of our process of thinking really carefully how we can, I suppose I'd use the phrase, use our cultural power for good. We don't want to just reflect a society and show how wrong or right it may have gone, but we think we can really be influential, and we can help our city in the subject of work. And so I want to thank all of our speakers, Elayne and John, Fauziya and Mark, and all of you for helping us to really think this through. It's part of our process of rethinking the whole gallery, as Claire said. We don't have an exact timetable for when a physical manifestation of this might be visible in the gallery, but we do intend to keep going, keep thinking along these lines, and taking all of your ideas and all of your help along with us. So if you'd like to stay in touch on this subject, my email address is hannah.williamson@manchester.gov.uk. You won't just be communicating with me. I can pass anything on to anyone you've heard speak tonight. And do look out for this event that we are recording, and in a week or so will be on the gallery YouTube channel. So do tell your friends if they want to look back and they couldn't come tonight. Thank you ever so much for coming, everyone. We'd love to welcome you to another event in the future, so do stay in touch. Good night.